ready? What are we doing here? Okay, somebody told me there'd be pie. I don't know. Let's start this thing. Hi, I'm GC Myers. That's Gary actually, but I do use the GC for my work. First thing out of the gate, let me welcome you to today's virtual gallery talk. We're streaming from the West End Gallery and historic Market Street in beautiful Corning, gateway to the Finger Lakes. Thank you for taking a little time out of your busy lives to spend a little time with us here at the gallery. This is, as I said, the first virtual talk that I, or for that matter, the gallery has attempted. And we're going to try to do our very best to make this talk go off with as few glitches as possible. We're going to try to keep it under 100 at least. We'll see. To that end, Jesse and Linda and John are over there. They're standing by. They're taking care of all the technical details, running the comments in the chat and all that kind of stuff. Plus, they've got a fire extinguisher and a cattle prod over there for those times when I get stuck, they can zap me. But we're going to try to keep that to a minimum too. Here's a little reminder. If you have any questions or comments, they're fine as well. During the first part of this talk, you'll be muted. Well, I should say, during the first part of this talk, you're going to be muted. But you can go to the chat section and you can type in a question. You can raise your hand. There's a button for that to make sure it gets noticed. If you're on a PC, the chat button should be at the bottom in the middle of the Zoom toolbar. On a mobile device, you probably have to go to the bottom right and click on where it says more. Quite honestly, I wasn't sure we'd be doing any kind of a gallery talk this year, or even a gallery show for that matter. It's been a year where putting on a regular exhibit presents a whole new set of challenges for any gallery. To their credit, Jesse and Lynn have done an incredible job in keeping the gallery safe as is humanly possible, while still making it look pretty effortless, even graceful. If you folks were here, I'd ask you to turn around and give them a hand. They certainly deserve it. But I guess we're not going to be able to do that this year. That's, one of the things we're losing, being able to give somebody a nice round of applause. It's one of the sacrifices we're going to make this year. And, doing this as a virtual event. Close human interaction and reaction has been kind of lost for the time being, or at least changed in some weird way that I'm still trying to adapt to. We probably all are, but we'll make do. Like they say, when life gives you rotten eggs, make lemonade. Wait, see, I'm gonna miss that part. See, that was what we call a joke. If you would have laughed normally at that point, and as it is now, it's just dead silent in here. Maybe I didn't have the saying right. Maybe it's when life gives you lemon, open up the gin. Maybe they don't say that either. I'm easily confused, but you get the idea. I do know that I am going to miss the interaction with you guys this year. Not seeing your faces and your reactions really takes away some of the fun of doing this for me. Like I say, I'm going to miss the laughter. Being a virtual wise ass is not nearly as much fun as being one in person. But we're going to see how it goes. What's the worst that could happen? Normally, I start the talk by kind of looking around the gallery and taking in the faces, seeing who's there, who I know, new faces and old friends. See how everyone seems to be at that moment, getting a temperature on the room. It's obviously a little tougher this year because I can't really see you, and I'm basically talking to the corner of my phone where the camera's located. When I was practicing, and believe it or not, I did practice this, I had an image of three faces taped above my camera. So I would know where I was talking. I would talk to that. And it also helped me remember to look at the camera. Uh, and it reminded me that there were people out there, that there were real faces out there listening, as I hope you are still. They were just stock faces. I didn't know their names, just faces. But they seemed nice and they served their purpose. Uh, Here's how this is going to go. I'm going to talk for a short while, 15 or 20 minutes, maybe 20 or 25 minutes, or 4 or 5 if I run out of gas. If you see me drinking a lot from my water bottle, you'll know I'm at a loss for words, or if you see me walk off camera, I usually come back, usually. But I'm going to start with a little talk, and then maybe we'll take a stroll around the gallery, and I'll show you some of the work from this show. Talk about some of the paintings, tell some stories, maybe a few lies here and there, just to keep you on your toes. While I'm talking, you can submit questions and comments, and as I mentioned before, if we can open the floor. At this point, it'll probably be written conversation, the questions will be relayed to me. I don't know that we're going to be able to actually talk face to face, but we'll see. Any questions? I also have some questions that came in beforehand that I'll get to, and any questions that you submit, that you put in. If I don't get to them, I will get back to you ASAP via email. So that sounds like a plan. Okay. I'm going to have a drink and then we're going to get going. Let's get this thing off the ground. Are you ready? We're going to start by talking about the show that's here right now, hanging at the West End Gallery. I've been showing my work here since February of 1995, so it's been over 25 years now, about 25 and a half years here at the West End. There's a story about how I started showing here that I've told umpteen times over the years. Many of you have heard it many, many times. If some of you don't know it, remind me and I will retell it during the Q&A session. I've added some new details for the folks who heard it before. There might be an alien abduction, I'm not sure. I won't know until I start talking. But like I said, I've been here at the West End for well over 25 years now, and I'm pretty sure this is my 18th solo show here. For several years early on, I was in a number of 2- and 3-person shows here. With its proximity and my history with it, the West End's been what I would call my home gallery for all that time. 25 good years, really. Every year for the past 18 years, I've done a July show, and this year we managed to put one on, the pandemic be damned. This year's show is titled From a Distance. It's obviously a reference to the current situation with all the restrictions from the pandemic. Quarantines and social distancing seem to pretty much taken center stage. Pretty much everyone is feeling some sense of isolation, some sort of distancing. There's definitely a space between us. For many folks, this distance feels like an unbearable burden, and I understand that. I get that. I mean, we want to be together. We want to see the faces of people we know. We want to shake hands and hug one another, and it's what we do. So you can see that the idea of using a title like From a Distance, one that pointed to this feeling of separation from others, made sense this year for most folks. But quite honestly, it's a title that I might have chosen in any other year. You see, being alone, being in some form of solitude has long been a normal state of being for me, maybe even a preferred state of being. I've always been kind of a social distancer, I guess you could say, early adapter. I was born, bred, and raised for at least some form of isolation. Uh, I had a lot of time alone as a kid, and that really set the stage for the life I live now. It made me understand the freedom that comes with solitude, uh, the freedom that it gives you to think, to let your mind wander, the freedom to imagine and daydream, uh, the freedom to choose your own way. Growing up, we lived in the country in an old farmhouse with no neighbors in sight. The place played a big part in shaping me. It had a big old barn behind it, and behind that there was a steep tree-covered hillside. And as a kid, I spent a ton of time wandering on that hillside as the terrain and the trees became backdrops for all sorts of adventures. Down trees became sailing ships, and I was usually a pirate, a buccaneer. There was one tree that was my favorite. It was an old oak with this big wide trunk that made a perfect ship's deck. It was, nice and flat and just long. It was big enough that I had to work really hard to climb on top of it. Well, I was much smaller than I was only like this tall, so maybe it wasn't that big, but it really didn't matter because in my mind, in my imagination, it was 100-foot pirate ship, and I was always sailing the Spanish Main, almost always. Well, and I was always alone. Uh, Between these imaginary voyages, I read a lot, and reading uh, opened up the world for me. It took me to places and introduced me to people that weren't part of my world. They weren't part of my life. Uh, it put me in different situations, strange situations, and it introduced me to wonders and dangers unknown to me before. Uh, Plus, reading taught me the lessons that I might not have been able to get that were lacking in my own world. Things like empathy, probably empathy more than anything. Reading by its very nature often tells a story by putting you in the place of the the storyteller. First person narratives, for example, are basically that. Uh, Reading made me try to look at situations from the viewpoint of someone other than myself. How would I act if I were that person in that book, in that situation? But beyond empathy, this time by myself as a kid taught me the lesson of aloneness. Aloneness. It showed me how to feel comfortable in my solitude. And it turns out that this ability to be alone, this willingness to be alone, it's a vital necessity for becoming an artist. I didn't know that at the time, of course. The idea of being an artist was a totally foreign concept. But over the years, as I began to understand that being an artist wasn't out of the realm of possibility, I began to see that how valuable this ability to be alone was, especially to an artist. That's a huge positive. Most people look at it as a negative, but for an artist, it's actually a positive. I can't imagine that they tell that to people in art school. Is this need to tolerate being alone is something I think people in the know probably want to keep as a secret because it seems kind of scary to a lot of people, almost antisocial. And I mean, we are, after all, social creatures for the most part. A lot of the things in our lives take group efforts, conquering worlds, assembling armies, going to the moon, building bridges and planes and ships and skyscrapers, finding a vaccine. They're all group efforts. But and so the conquest of the physical world through these group efforts, they're definitely important, and they are social efforts. But as momentous as conquering the outside world is to us, the conquest of the inner world is equally as important. Um, while the outer world deals with the where and the how of us as a people, the physical bones and structure of the world, uh, the inner world reveals the who that we are. and the why we are who we are. And like it or not, it's exclusively a solo journey. But even so, it's anything but antisocial. You see, it's a solo trek, an adventure made for one that has to be made. It has to be made so that we can make the outer world a more tolerable place in which to live. It makes the world a more human place to live. And though not everyone follows the path of the artist, it actually involves all of us in some way. It comes back to each and every one of us. It's something we all ultimately are connected with. And that's mainly because at some point, we all experience aloneness. Aloneness is the great common denominator. It's the single trait that we all share, even though we try like hell to avoid it. Some people can't spend a moment alone, and most of us don't want to even acknowledge it. But being alone is part of who we are. It's part of our makeup. And you see it mainly in the most important times of our existence. Birth, for example. There we are, we're perfectly alone, floating calmly around in the womb, warm and content. Then all of a sudden, in a rush of fluids, flesh, and light, we emerge into the outer world. You might even have somebody there, a nurse or a doctor, slapping you on the ass. Now, your mothers and the mothers out there, right now are probably not going to agree with this. And I certainly understand that. But we all make that journey alone into the world. We're born alone. And at the other end of the spectrum, it's the same with our journey into death. No one can truly tell us with any real knowledge, with any degree of certainty, where or how we may go after life has left our bodies. They can't explain how we would travel into that next phase of our existence, nor can they go along with us. They cannot accompany us. We go it alone. We have to. And beyond birth and death, there's the aloneness of sorrow and grief. Nobody truly knows the secret depth of someone else's grief and sorrow. They can't, because it's ours alone. We carry it alone. You can even point to deep love as being something we carry alone. So there you go. You got birth, death, sorrow, and love. The big moments in life, and we go it alone. And only we know what it is for ourselves. And that's where the artist comes in. They're used to going it alone. They're used to traveling alone. They're used to going down those secret inner paths by themselves. They go deep into themselves and they seek that inner aloneness and everything that it goes along with it. They go so far, they cultivate it, they harvest it, and eventually they bring it back and they share it with others. And maybe that's the purpose of the artist, to bring back that sense of being alone to those of us who avoid it or who've just plain forgotten it. On my best days in the studio, I experience all of these phases of aloneness, that sense of birth and death, beginnings and endings, the pain of deep sorrow and the aching and longing that comes with deep love. Those are the days when I feel like I'm seeing through the eyes of both a newborn baby and the eyes of a dying man. When I feel like I'm in the throes of being madly in love and in the depths of despair at the same time from losing it all at the same time. And you heard me right, though. I said that those are my best days in the studio. They make this whole effort, this trying to live as an artist, worthwhile for me. They're the best days. I say that because on those days, even though I'm experiencing the depths of aloneness, I feel closer to humanity, more connected to the human race than in any other time. I feel absolutely fortunate on those days I feel like I have some purpose in this world that I get to share these days with others through my work. I know that sounds funny, that I feel good because I get to share my deep aloneness with you, but think about it. How we experience, how we see, how we feel art is another one of those things that is ours alone. When you're looking at a piece of art, and I'm using the visual definition here, it could be music or dance or film or any other discipline. But in this case, when you're looking at art, it's through your eyes, your experiences in the world, your sensibilities, your joys and dislikes. Uh, Nobody can tell you how to feel about art. It has to speak to your own sense of aloneness. And then I think that's what real art does. It reaches out and lets you know that this is who you are, that this is what you are. And it tells you that someone else recognizes that and knows, at least in some small way, that same sense of aloneness. It lets you know that in a universe of aloneness, in a world where we enter and leave alone, that you're ultimately not alone. It might be called an understanding. And that's art. At least that's how I see it. Well, then it has to match your sofa, but I'm just kidding, of course. Now, what I just said about experiencing the different forms of aloneness in the day is it's a pretty big look into my process, how I view how things come about for me. I use it as an indicator of my readiness for a show. For me, because I'm emotion based, there's like a threshold that I have to come to. It's not, I can't just sit down and produce work. There's got to be some kind of emotional connection there. And I know for this show, that was the case. You see, I've done 50 plus solo shows through the years. And I can always tell if and when I'm fully emotionally invested in the work. It's not something I want to freely admit, but since I try to be as transparent and as honest in these talks as I can, it usually comes to me in the form of being easily moved to tears. When I find that, when I find myself on that bare, jagged edge, that threshold, and that's how I describe it, where I'm easily emotionally affected by simple words and phrases and images, sounds and rhythms, gestures and movement. It's at that point that I know I'm ready, that the work is ready to flow. Now, this year's shows, both here at the West End and my annual show at the Principal Gallery in Alexandria, Virginia, were not easy in that aspect. It took some time to get to that emotional threshold that I look for, that I depend on. It didn't come at first. And this was frustrating and even a little worrisome. It just bugged me. And it bugged me because in this year of all years, it would have seemed like it would have been exceedingly easy to find something to cry about. I mean, look at it. Every new day this year, we've had some new revelation, something new shocking us, of confounding us, of angering us, of making us plain crazy with anxiety and fear. I want to cry right now just thinking about that. But after some time fighting this, I realized, I fought it, I agonized over it. I realized that this was actually the problem that was stifling that emotional threshold I was needing for my work. What I mean is, the problems of the outer world were so dramatic and dark that I wasn't easily able to go deep inside where I needed to go. The outer was keeping me from the inner, and why wouldn't it? artists often think they should be fixing things, or at least empowering and inspiring change. There's a there's a compulsion of some sort that comes with being an artist. They have a need to make things line up properly. They need to make the outer world align with their inner vision of that outer world. And I think this comes from the fact that they often spend a lot of their time just watching things. Most artists are good observers in some way. They usually grow up watching and noting others. I know I did. And as they watch, they sometimes begin to notice rhythms and patterns in the world, patterns of behavior, patterns of reaction, cause and effect. They can sometimes see where things are going before others. You often see this come to fruition with sci-fi writers who sometimes seem downright prescient in their vision for the future. The late Octavia Butler wrote a book, The Parable of the Sower. She wrote this 28 years ago. I think it was 92 or 3. And it takes place in this country just a couple of years from now, I think in 2024. And the country is every bit as broken as you might imagine. It's pretty alarming how relevant her vision from the past feels at this moment, 27 years later. It sure feels like she saw some kind of pattern and could imagine it forward. And seeing this, she wanted to fix it. She wanted to warn us. And maybe this compulsion to fix the world comes from that people like her and other artists, they operate from that same emotional threshold, the one I've been describing. They feel things deeply and they respond strongly. There are problems with that, of course. You know, it's not an ideal. It's the best of the world and the worst of the world. Sometimes creates this sense of responsibility, one that seems almost irrational at times. A couple of years ago, I talked about something I'd read about Virginia Woolf, where she talked about 3 exceptional incidents she'd had as a young girl that drove her to want to be an artist, a writer in her case. 2 were awful incidents. One was a beating given to her from her brother. He was beating her, and at one point she was ready to raise her hand and fight back, and she just stopped and allowed him to beat her. And the other was the suicide of a neighbor. These incidents made her feel hopelessly sad. She felt just a deep despair. The world seemed broken to her, beyond repair. But the third incident, excuse me, I'm going to have a little drink. I'm not used to talking this much, believe me. But the third thing, the third incident was a really simple thing. She noticed a flower outside the door of her family's home, and she looked at it and she studied it, and she saw its connection to everything in the world, the soil, the sky, the air. It grew down into the ground and it reached up for the sky. And there was this wholeness to it that she could see. It had, the way she put it was, it had a reason to be. It had this reason where the other 2 incidents had none. The awful incidents showed her then that the pattern of the world is damaged and needs to be repaired. And the flower showed her that there was indeed the potential for repair. And she knew from this simple revelation that her purpose was to somehow make the world whole in whatever way she could as herself, to either repair it or at least point out where the pattern of the world is damaged and where it needs to be repaired. I'm sure there are composers and choreographers, filmmakers and sculptors and all sorts of artists out there who can relate to that, and plenty of non-artists as well. Doctors and therapists and surrogates and advocates, for example, who all have the same sense of needing to repair the world. Something drives them want to make the world whole again. Now, for Virginia Woolf, it was writing. For me, in my own small way, it's painting. I'm. This is my attempt at making the world whole. Even then, I might be deluded in that. That might be some kind of grandiose thought. I could just be the crazy guy in the forest smearing paint on canvas or a board for a living. And if that's the case, so long as I believe that it's my purpose, I can live with that. There are worse things in this world than being the crazy guy alone in the woods with a paintbrush in his hand. In the words of John Prine, who died from COVID-19, by the way, I ain't hurting nobody, I ain't hurting no one. I'm going to end this section of the talk with a James Baldwin quote that pretty much sums up what we've been talking about so far. It's from an essay he wrote in the early 60s on the creative process. He said, an artist is a sort of emotional or spiritual historian. His role is to make you realize the doom and glory of knowing who you are and what you are. He has to tell, because nobody else in the world can tell what it is to be alive. All I've ever wanted to do is tell that I'm not trying to solve anybody's problems, not even my own. I'm just trying to outline what the problems are. I want to be stretched, shook up, to overreach myself and to make you feel that way too. I think those are pretty good targets for any artist. Well, I want to stop for just a second here and just say, I hope you see the optimistic part of that. Taken wrong, that is actually an optimistic viewpoint of the artist's purpose and journey. Okay.